Okay, so running a caring professions business, let's get started. First of all, what I want to talk about is the background to the whole situation around running a caring professions business. What we need to recognise is that the world of work is changing. It's been changing for quite some time now. There have been a number of changes that have been coming through, each of them adding extra weight, extra pressures, extra challenges for us to wrestle with. So before I go too much further, let's just have a look at some of those ways in which the world of work has been changing. I want to focus on four in particular, and I'm not suggesting in any way that these are the only four, but they're the four that I particularly want to focus on. The first one is privatisation. What we've seen over the years is government after government that has sold off public services in a sense. For example, I never thought that I would see the day when prisons were run by private companies for profit. But that's the reality of the situation. If we look back over the last 10 years, and especially the last 20 years, what we see is that a lot of things that were previously deemed to be public services are now run as private businesses. And from my own personal point of view, I'm not in favour of that. I think that that's a bad move, but what we have to recognise is that we now face the reality of that situation. The fact that I don't like it doesn't alter the fact that this is the world in which we now need to operate and we need to adjust to. And in a sense, that's part of what this webinar is all about, is adapting to this new world of work. Second thing I wanted to say a few words about is the significance of short-term contracts. For example, universities used to employ researchers on permanent contracts. Somebody could get a job as a researcher in a university. Those jobs are now very few and far between. What tends to happen is that researchers are given a contract relating to a particular project, a particular funding stream, and when that funding stream runs out, they then have to apply for another contract. So the world of work in terms of university research has gradually become quite insecure and therefore potentially quite stressful as well. But I'm just using universities as an example. Of course, it isn't just universities. More and more people now are finding it difficult to get what we would regard as a permanent job. The idea of a job for life has long since gone, sadly. So the emphasis on short-term contracts gives a lot of flexibility to employers, but it can cause lots of problems for employees or for people who want to be employees but are struggling to get a contract. Then the third aspect of this I want to talk about is the gig economy, and this is particularly relevant to us now in terms of this webinar, of course. The gig economy refers to the fact that so many things now that were previously provided by people who were on a salary are now being provided on a self-employed basis. And there are some advantages to that, not only for organisations who need people's services, but also for people who are self-employed. But there are also problems and challenges associated with this. And rising to some of those challenges is what we're going to be looking at shortly. But again, it's a further layer of insecurity in the modern world of work. And then, of course, what's become very much an issue lately is the idea of remote working, partly for cost reasons, and partly for other reasons, of course. What we're seeing now is more and more emphasis on remote working. The idea of hot desking is part of this, the expectation that workers who would previously need a fixed office space of their own being asked to be flexible again, and that includes a lot of working from home on a remote basis. So again, it's about flexibility. And some of that flexibility has advantages for the worker, for the person providing the services. For example, somebody who's able to work from home may be able to have greater flexibility about when they work in terms of caring for children, picking them up from school, that sort of thing. But we shouldn't be naive. We shouldn't fail to recognise that all these changes are mainly in the interests of the organisations concerned and the wider government apparatus. It's creating some opportunities, as we shall be seeing, but also lots of challenges. So this is the context in which we are looking at running caring professions businesses. The more privatisation we have, the more of an emphasis on the gig economy and so on, the greater the demand for self-employed caring professionals. But matching being a caring professional with being self-employed is not necessarily easy. And part of the reason for that is that there are different and sometimes conflicting occupational mindsets. Now, what do I mean by an occupational mindset? Well, the basic idea is that when you are socialized into a particular profession or occupation or type of occupation, there are certain things you tend to take for granted. You become part of a culture. You adopt a particular mindset. And then in other workplaces, in other settings, people may be adopting a very different mindset. And when we go from being an employee to running our own business, then there is a switch of mindset there in a sense. And that, in terms of caring professions, that tends to operate in terms of two sets of issues. One is the difference between being an employee and being self-employed. When you're an employee, certain things are provided for you. You know, it is the duty of your employer to provide you with, for example, training, with supervision perhaps, and so on. But when you're self-employed, that doesn't come with the job itself. You have to make your own arrangements for training and ongoing professional development. And in terms of supervision, you either have to go without or again make your own arrangements for that, perhaps through some sort of mentoring arrangement or whatever. But the point I want to emphasize is that there are significant differences between being an employee and being self-employed. So that switch of mindset can be significant, and I'm aware that quite a few people have found that difficult. But in terms of the caring professions, there's also a second set of issues around occupational mindsets, and that's public service versus private business. As a member of the caring professions, you will presumably have been originally working as part of a public service, whether that's a local authority, the NHS, or whatever. And there are certain sort of cultural issues that go with that, certain sets of assumptions, again, occupational mindsets that are part and parcel of being a public servant and being committed to public service as well. But when it comes to running a business, then it's as if it's a different world because there's a different occupational mindset. There are different things that we have to address, different things that are taken for granted. And so we need to be able to not abandon our public service mentality or mindset, but extend it to incorporate issues that are important in terms of running a business. So Let's have a look now then at what are some of the key issues in terms of incorporating a business mindset to run alongside a commitment to public service and basically doing good, making a positive difference. So, what are some of the key aspects of a business mindset? Well, first of all, if you're self-employed in a business context, there's no hierarchy. You don't have a boss. You are your own boss, in a sense. Now, for some people, that can be hugely liberating, that they will be in a position where they feel so much better not having to be answerable to a boss, that they make their own decisions, they're in charge of what they do. And that includes just the practicalities in terms of what time they get up in the morning, what time they start work, and how long before they take a break and that sort of thing. So there are lots of benefits in terms of that idea of not having a hierarchy that you're part of. But there's also a downside to this. Well, for some people, at least, quite a few people I've spoken to have felt quite insecure and quite anxious because they haven't got a boss. If things go wrong, who do they go to? Who do they go to for advice? Who is the wise person that's been round the block a few times that can give help and advice around thorny issues and so on? So being your own boss can have positives and negatives. But an important thing to recognise, of course, is that it is quite a significant challenge to adjust from being employed, particularly in the public service, to being self-employed in a business context. Then there's the issue of supervision. Now, the extent to which members of caring professions receive supervision or good supervision, I'm very aware that this varies significantly. This has been a major part of my work over the years, and I've published a lot of stuff around good practice in supervision. So I'm aware that you can't take for granted that if you work in the caring professions as an employee, that you will get good supervision. But it is still an important part of the framework, if you like, of being an employee in the public services, in the caring professions in particular. But when you're self-employed, then the situation is different. When you're in business, then, as I mentioned a moment ago, you either have to go without supervision or make your own arrangements. Increasingly now, people are arranging to get private supervision. There are people who can provide supervision on an hourly basis on a paid rate. Some other people are using the idea of peer supervision. So if you know other people who are in a similar setting to yourself, a similar set of circumstances, then you may be able to have some sort of mutual supervision arrangement whereby you're able to support one another, you're able to do some critical questioning to make sure that you're not making some unwarranted assumptions or leading yourself in a potentially dangerous direction and so on. But the key point here is that you have to make your own arrangements. That's part of having a business mindset, is if you want it to happen, you have to make it happen. There isn't a boss who will say your next supervision session is a week on Tuesday. You have to make it happen. And the next thing that's significant is that organizations tend to have a structure. They tend to have different departments that do different things. There are different functions. But if you're running your own business, then in a sense, you are that structure. I've had some interesting telephone conversations over the years since I've been self-employed, when I've had people trying to sell me stuff, ringing up and say, can you please put me through to your marketing department? Or can you please let me speak to your purchasing manager? And all these different things are basically me. So again, there are positives and negatives to that. A lot of people love the freedom of that, and I would include myself in that. I've really flourished since I've been self-employed. Not that I wasn't flourishing before, but it has really suited me to be more or less fully in control of how things work in my business as far as possible. But I'm also conscious that there are some people who really struggle with this. They find it really difficult to have to juggle lots of different things. I remember, for example, somebody I knew some years ago who had been a senior manager with a secretary, and he then took early retirement and set himself up as a self-employed consultant and very much enjoyed that. But he told me on a number of occasions that what he really missed was having a secretary to be able to just delegate something that needed doing to someone else. And of course, as a self-employed consultant, he had to do all that himself, which was not a major problem. But as I say, it can provide difficulties for some people. And again, some people can feel insecure that they're not part of a wider organizational structure, that in a sense the buck rests with them. They can't put anything on their manager's desk to be dealt with. But as I say, positives as well to that, so let's not unduly emphasize the negatives. Then there's the issue about an office, and there's two aspects to this: space and equipment on the one hand, and working practices. If you are part of a business setup, you have to make your own arrangements for working space and the equipment that you will need. So you need to be able to make sure that you have proper working space as far as you can. To a lot of people, it's the kitchen table, right through to at the other extreme, there are people who've had offices built in their back garden, for example, as a sort of an outbuilding to their main residence. Now, where you fall on that continuum between the kitchen table and a purpose-built office in your back garden will be significant, but the point is that you have to be able to make your own arrangements for that. And so if you're not yet self-employed and considering it, you need to give some thought to that about where will you actually work, what is a suitable space for you to work in. And then linked to that, there is equipment. Will you have the necessary equipment? And again, this ranges from a stapler right through to things like laser printers, scanners, and so on. You may not need many of these things, but you need to be clear that you will have to establish what your needs are and make sure that you're fulfilling them. Then, in sticking with the theme of an office, there are working practices to bear in mind. And what I mean by working practices is a set of routines. How are you going to work? One thing that I know a lot of people have struggled with by running their own business from a home office is establishing routines, just simple things like timing. What time are you going to start work? If you work in an office and you're expected to be there at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, then it's fairly easy to discipline yourself to do that. But when you're self-employed, you're running your own business, then there are issues that you need to take into account. And what I've come across is people, in a sense, getting it wrong in both directions. So I've had some people who have really struggled to make a living because they're just not putting the hours in. Because they're working from home, they're too easily distracted. They will find all sorts of things to do rather than knuckle down and get on with their work. So a few self-employed people have told me that they live in beautifully clean houses because they were going for all sorts of avoidance behaviour in terms of preferring to do the hoovering than to settling down and do whatever their job requires them to do. But I've also come across people who've struggled because they've gone to the other extreme, is because there is nobody saying you finish at 5, then they can find themselves overworking, working far more hours than is good for them. So it's important to have the self-discipline to be able to establish helpful working practices and stick to them. And with that thought in mind, do bear in mind that self-discipline is not something you have, it's something you do. So it's about establishing the practices, making sure you stick to them, developing the skills involved of, in a sense, being self-directed. So these are all important aspects of having an occupational mindset that is consistent both with being a member of the caring professions and running your own business. But let's have a look at a few more as well, because we haven't quite finished yet. What we have to recognise too is that there are different pressures. For example, if you are a paid employee, then presumably you don't have to worry about getting paid. That the normal date when you get paid your salary will come each month or whatever, and you may feel that the salary you get isn't high enough, or at least it's likely to come through without any hassles. Whereas when you're self-employed, getting people to pay your invoices can be difficult, and there can be additional pressures there in terms of making sure people actually remember to pay you. And to be fair, most organisations that I've worked with have paid on time without any difficulties, but I've also had significant wrangles with some organisations. And one particular organisation, that shall remain nameless, for example, I had to threaten to take them to court. And since then, I think it's 3 times they've asked me to do work for them, and I've refused unless they're prepared to pay me in advance, because I didn't want to go through months of wrangling to get paid. The late payments legislation has been useful, threatening people who are not reliable in terms of payments, that will be claiming compensation and interest if they don't pay on time, can be a useful pressure point, but that brings its own hassles as well. So the point I'm making is that you have to be prepared for additional pressures, and getting paid is just one of them. Then there are different priorities in a sense, or at least different ways of establishing priorities. If you are working in an organisation and the emphasis is on working within certain policies and procedures, then to a certain extent what is the priority is to a large extent predefined. Whereas when you're running your own business, then to a large extent it's up to you to define your priorities. For example, I've come across people who are self-employed who have prioritised earning as much money as possible. And so in terms of work-life balance, they've lost out. They may have had quite a lot of money in their bank balance, but as a result of that, they've seen little of their family. They've perhaps missed out on seeing their children growing up to a large extent because they spend so many hours working. So it's about clarifying what are your priorities and not just assuming that if you're in business, then the name of the game is earn as much money as possible. For example, I've turned down work at times because although it would have been nice to get the money for that work, it would have cost me in terms of other things I would have had to miss out on in order to fit that work in to my schedule. So again, different priorities because of this different occupational mindset, the different context in terms of running a business. Now, the next issue is important too in terms of different values. And I'm not for a second suggesting that the sort of values we have in the caring professions, like dignity, respect, equality and diversity and so on, I'm not suggesting for a moment that these don't exist in the business world. They certainly do. But there are also other values that operate within the business world. Things like value for money, for example, which is not necessarily something that caring professionals have as a value, but something that matters in the business world. It's something that can be quite significant. And what I want to avoid is the sort of stereotyping I've come across, which is the assumption that people in the business world are greedy and don't have any sort of morals, they're unscrupulous, all they're interested in is earning as much money as possible and don't pay any attention to things like respect and dignity and so on and so forth. That is a stereotype. Of course, there are people in the business world who fit into that sort of model, but there are also lots of people I've come across in the business world who are very kind-hearted, decent, dignified people with a solid value base that would fit nicely within the caring professions. So let's not fall into this trap of thinking that the business world does not have values in the sense that we have them in caring professions. And then last but not least, in terms of these occupational mindsets issues, is that we need to recognize that to a large extent these are complementary rather than conflicting. What I mean by that is there is nothing to stop somebody who has a solid caring professions background, fully committed to what caring is all about. There is nothing to stop that person from making a success in a competitive business world. Of course, it is different because of the competitive element and various other things we've been discussing and others we haven't got time to discuss. But what we shouldn't be doing is making the assumption that they're totally different worlds, they don't overlap. My experience over the last 23 years or so since I became self-employed is that they overlap to a considerable extent. There are some differences and some areas of conflict, of course, but for the most part, there's absolutely no reason why somebody with a caring professions background can't make the adjustment to operating in a business world. It's, as I said, it's not so much a case of abandoning your caring professions background as extending it to incorporate these important aspects of, in a sense, being a businessman or a businesswoman who is running a business, but a caring professions business. So you're combining, in a sense, the best of both worlds. Now, what I want to look at now is some specific issues around this business mindset that I've mentioned. So developing a business mindset. And of course, that big red button with sell written on it tells you a key aspect of developing a business mindset. And this is probably, in my experience, the thing that people from a caring professions background struggle with most. But I'll come back to that point in a moment. Let's have a look at some of these issues about developing a business mindset. You have to be able to sell what you are offering. That's a key difference. If you are a nurse or other health professional, you're a social worker, you're whatever, you are a probation officer, you're working in an organization, then the people who want your services come to you. You don't have to sell your services in that sense. The demand for what you have to offer is, in a sense, built into the structure and the ethos of the organisation. But if you are an independent social worker, you're a self-employed counsellor, therapist, or whatever, then you're running your own business, then the selling element has to be part of it. And that links strongly to marketing. But I'll come back to that in a moment, because I want to say a lot more about marketing. Then the next issue is the idea of your brand. Now, a lot of people have a very narrow view of what brand means. They think of the brand as their logo and the sort of the livery on their stationery and things like that. And that's part of it, but only a small part. What your brand is actually about is the personality of your business. What do people associate with your business? What do they see, for example, as your values? What do they see as your strong points? So it's this personality or ethos of what you have to offer is what your brand is all about. So, for example, if you're offering some sort of therapeutic support, then clearly you have to be seen as reliable and trustworthy. That has to be part of your brand. And if you think about big, well-known organizations, their brand isn't just their logo and their artwork and so on. It's about what do you associate with certain organizations? What is their personality or their ethos? And these things are normally easily recognizable. So to make the best of your business, you have to have a brand. You have to be seen as your business having a personality. And it may be you personally, that's what comes across, that you are the reliable person. You are the trustworthy one. But there are other ways as well in which you can try and get that message across. That's what brand is all about. In public service, you don't need a brand. In business, you do need a brand, because you'll have one whether you create one or not. It'll be how you come across to people. So, for example, if you come across as disorganized, unreliable, think about the local builder who never turns up, the plumber who never returns your calls, and so on. That's all part of their brand. So what is your brand? What are you saying to the people who are likely to want your services? Next, we have the idea of business goals and strategy. What are you actually trying to achieve in your business? I had an interesting conversation with my accountant many years ago. She said to me, Neil, you need to be clear. Are you self-employed or are you running a business? And I rather naively said, well, aren't those the same thing? And she said, no, they're not really. Because if you were, say, a plumber working for a plumbing company and you decided to go freelance, then if you're self-employed, you would just be doing within your own business more or less exactly the same as you were doing for the company, except instead of getting a salary check at the end of the month, you sent out invoices and got paid that way. That's being self-employed. But if you're running a business, then you have to have business goals. You have to start thinking about, well, is there a new market that you can enter? Could you offer your services to a group of people you've never considered offering them to before? Could you develop new services? Is there something that your skill set and your experience allows you to do that you hadn't thought of doing before? So it's about developing a strategy for your business with clear business goals. What is it you want to achieve? So, for example, in my own case, as a result of that conversation with my accountant, I developed a range of e-learning courses. I was previously running around the country, running live training courses and wearing myself out with all the traveling. And when I reached a certain age where I didn't want to do that anymore, I started developing e-learning courses, and I was very glad I did. And that was as a result of that conversation with my accountant, where she very wisely said, basically, do you have a business strategy, Neil, or are you just wanting to continue for years and years to be running around the country running training courses? So that's what this is about. These sort of issues in public service, you don't have to consider them. You don't have to think about them. But they're very important in terms of getting the best results in terms of the business that you are running. Then there's financial planning you have to take into account. A classic mistake in terms of running a business is forgetting about the tax and VAT, if you're VAT registered, that is. Many a business has gone bust because basically the money came into the business, including the element that has to be taxed, and no allowance was made for that. So what I did right from day one when I became self-employed 23 years ago was to make sure that I estimated the amount of I would need to pay in tax, and later when I became VAT registered, how much I would have to pay in VAT, and I put that to one side so that when the quarterly bill for the VAT came in, or I had to pay the annual tax bill, then the money was there, and it wasn't a case of needing to be bailed out or start looking for a job because I couldn't sustain my business. Another thing to consider is whether there is any benefit in taking out a loan. If your services are producing a good return on investment, and you have the opportunity to expand, but you don't have the finances, then if you do careful financial planning, you can work out whether or not it is worth making that financial investment. To be perfectly honest, I've never done that. I've never taken a loan. I've never looked to expand beyond what I could fund directly myself. But a lot of people have lost out in terms of possible business developments because they could have made a very successful development if they'd had the right sort of financial backing, but they either weren't aware of it or they didn't take that step. And of course, there are some people who've gone to the other extreme. They've rather unwisely taken on additional financial pressures and created problems for themselves. So thinking about the financial issues is an important part of this business mindset that I've been talking about. And then almost at the end of the list now, succession planning is next. What's going to happen when you want to stop working? Are you planning on selling your business, for example? Are you thinking of becoming part of a partnership, and then your partner can continue to exercise the business, as it were, run the business with you getting some sort of interest or commission on that? It's a mistake that a lot of people make. A lot of people who are not business savvy, shall we say, just think, well, I shall work like this until I retire and then I will stop. And of course, if they've done their financial planning right, then they will have a nice pension to rely on. But for a lot of people, they will have lots of expertise and experience that could be very valuable, but it's not being used because that person has retired. So there are ways and means of, in a sense, investing your experience and expertise in other ways. And that's what succession planning is all about. In a normal business setting, it's where a business owner will hand over the business to their children, for example, to continue the family firm and so on. And that may be possible in your case. I obviously don't know. But it's more than that. It's not just a thing about thinking about, will my son or daughter pick up this business when they're ready? It's also about other ways in which your experience and expertise, which can be very valuable, don't just get wasted when you start drawing your pension. And then last but not least, in terms of these issues I want to look at is marketing. And I want to say quite a bit about this because I'm very conscious that this is the thing that people struggle with most. It takes us back to this idea of selling. I said I'd come back to this, and this is that moment now. The thing with selling is it tends not to come naturally to those of us with a public service background. I know when I first started as a self-employed trainer and consultant and author, I really struggled with this. I've been lucky in a sense that before I went freelance, I'd been working as a professor in a university, and the university used to sort of rent me out at times to organisations. I would say run a day's training for a local organisation, and I would just get my normal salary, but that organisation would pay a fee to the university for my services. So it was fairly easy for me to just say to organisations, I will do it for the same amount you paid the university, but instead of paying the university, you pay me. Is that okay? And I was lucky that most of those, well, in fact, all of those, actually said, yes, we'll be happy to pay that. So getting into a selling mindset was already partly in place for me. So I was lucky, but it is something a lot of people really struggle with. Now, marketing is part of the selling. Of course, you can't sell something if you don't market it. So let's have a look at some issues specifically about marketing. First of all, what we need to recognize is marketing is all about communication. It's about getting your marketing message out there. So that's the first step. Recognize what we're talking about is communication. So the next thing you need to be clear about is who are you communicating to? In other words, who are your market? Who is likely to be signing the check? Who is likely to be receiving your invoice? That's what you need to be clear about. And so, for example, if I wanted to market a training course I was running, then I could try publicizing that to the people who are likely to want to be have a place on that course. But then, of course, they're not the people who are going to be commissioning me or signing the check when they get my invoice. So the people I would need to be communicating with are training officers, training managers, workplace development officers, and people like that. So who are you targeting? Who do you need to be communicating with about what you offer? And that may or may not be the end user. As in my case, for people on a training course, trying to market my services to people on training courses is not likely to be helpful. I have to try and market my services to the people who commission training courses. Now that may sound simple and straightforward, but it's amazing how many people get this wrong, and they're actually targeting the wrong people. Once you're clear about who you're targeting, then you need to be clear about what you're communicating. In other words, what is your marketing message? Now, that's a key term in the business world, your marketing message. How do you put that across? What is it that you are trying to communicate? What is it that you're offering in a sense? Now, one important thing about this is that what you need to think about is the benefits of what you're offering. This in the business world is known as benefits-based marketing. For example, if I wanted to sell a computer, if I talked about the aspects of that computer, like it's the different elements of it, it's got such and such a size memory, and it uses such and such a chip, and it's got this facility and so on, then unless you're some sort of techno nerd, that's pretty meaningless. It's not likely to get you to buy that computer. The idea of benefits-based marketing is it's saying what that computer can do for you. So good marketing, a good marketing message for a computer would be, this computer works so fast that it will save you loads of time. No more time wasted waiting for a slow computer. Or words to the effect of, because of such and such a facility within this computer, it will save you loads of hassle. So it's actually communicating the benefits. So if you say, I can offer this service, I can offer that service, I can do this, I can do that, that's no problem, as long as you're also saying, by offering this, I can help you to achieve that. I can solve this problem for you. I can meet this need for you. Because if you're not solving people's problems and meeting their needs, they're not going to put their hand in their pocket or pull out their credit card or their checkbook or whatever. So that's the idea of benefits-based marketing, something that people in the business world tend to be well tuned into, and something I've become well tuned into over the 23 years, but it took me a long time to get my head around that. A lot of people from a caring professions background don't think in those terms. They will just say, I can offer this, this and this, without actually, in a sense, reeling people in and saying, because I can offer this, then you will benefit in this way. So in terms of your marketing message, you need to think about what benefits can I offer people. Okay, now we also need to think about how do you get your marketing message across. So let's have a look at how are you communicating. What I want to talk about is these four different elements. First of all, it's highly unlikely you're going to succeed in business these days if you don't have a website. Some people manage to get away with it, most don't. But the thing about websites is that most of them don't actually do their job. And the reason for that is that most websites, funnily enough, are designed by web designers. And web designers normally have a background in IT and in graphic design and stuff like that. So they can perhaps produce a beautiful website for you. But if they don't have an understanding of marketing, and you don't have an understanding of marketing, the chances are that the website won't actually bring you any business. So that's something to bear in mind. Does your website actually do its job? Is it benefits focused for example, or does it just list the services that you can offer? Next, there's SEO, search engine optimization. How do people find you? If they are looking for a service you can offer and they type that into Google, will your website come up? Now, getting SEO right is a very specialist job, and if the people who provide this will often charge a lot of money for it, but that can be worth it if it actually brings you a lot of business. But just putting a website up and hoping that somehow by magic people will find you is a bit optimistic, to put it mildly. Then we have social media. Now, social media can be really frustrating and irritating and annoying, but from a business point of view, they can also be very useful because they offer opportunities for you to get your marketing message across at little or no cost if you know what you're doing. And I say if you know what you're doing because most businesses using social media don't have a social media marketing strategy. They just put stuff on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn or whatever and hope for the best. And that's not likely to work. And what they'll also do, which takes us back to the working practices idea we just discussed before, what they'll often do is spend a huge amount of time on social media with little or no return on their investment. So you need to know what you're doing with social media. Then last but not least, there's advertising. Now, traditional advertising is very hit and miss. There are people who have spent a small fortune on a full-page advert in a newspaper only to find that they get little or no response. I know somebody who developed a particular type of software and created a CD-ROM with a sample of that software on it as a sort of a marketing, advertising tool, and paid a computer magazine that delivered 35,000 copies of that CD-ROM. In other words, they gave it away free with that copy of the magazine. So this guy spent a fortune having 35,000 copies of a CD-ROM produced and then paid the magazine a fortune to distribute it. Now that could have worked because this was expensive software, and if they got lots of responses from that, they would more than get their investment back. But as it turned out, they got one inquiry, and that inquiry did not lead to a sale. So a huge waste. Now, having said that, advertising, conventional advertising, can work extremely well, but there's a big, big element of luck involved in that. What a lot of people now are doing is social media advertising. So they're paying for adverts on Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on. Now, the benefits of doing that are that they can be targeted. So if you're paying for an advert on, say, Facebook, you can actually specify who you want to see that advert. So it's much better targeted. But even that, there's still no guarantee of success. Now, a lot of people have successful businesses without ever advertising, and that's fine. But if you do decide to use advertising, you don't have to, clearly, because as I say, lots of successful businesses never advertise. But if you do decide to advertise, you need to be very careful. You need to be very clear about what you want to achieve through that advertising, where you're going to advertise, who it's targeted at, and what are the chances of getting a return on your investment. So advertising is very much a part of the marketing world, but a lot of people automatically assume that they have to do advertising, and you don't. But as I say, it's something to consider. Okay, now what I want to say to try and pull all this together is a big question, is this DIY or DFY when it comes to marketing? Now what does that mean? Well, DIY is, as you'd expect, do it yourself. So when it comes to creating a website and search engine optimization, social media and stuff like that, yeah, you can do that yourself if you want. It's not that difficult to produce a basic website. If you've got some degree of technical skill, you can do your own social media, your own search engine optimization and so on. But there are two questions there. One is that going to be effective? For example, if you do your website and it looks pretty amateurish, what's it doing in terms of your marketing message? What's it actually saying to people about you if what they see is a fairly amateurish website? And the second issue as well is that you can spend an awful lot of time on these things that is better spent on other aspects of your business. So you could, for example, as many people do, spend hours messing about with social media and get little or nothing by way of business in return. You have to be wary of what people call vanity metrics. People can be quite chuffed when they put something on Facebook and several people share it, and there's lots of people been looking at what they put on Facebook. But then you have to ask the question, did that actually produce any income? That time that you spent on it, did you actually get a return on that investment? It's nice to have people sharing what you put on Facebook or wherever on social media, but does it actually bring a return on the investment of time and effort that went into it? And again, linked to that is what I said before. If you don't have a social media strategy, you're not clear about what you're doing, then the chances are you'll waste a huge amount of time and get nowhere. So DIY is a possibility, but there's also DFY, which is done for you. Now, this is where you pay other people to produce your website, do the search engine optimization, manage social media for you, and so on. And you may think, well, I can't afford that, but you have to think about balancing the outgoings against the possible income. And in terms of your time, for example, if you were to spend an hour a day on messing about with social media and you get no results, what could you have earned in that hour if you were paying somebody else to do that for you? And the chances are, for most people, the chances are that you can earn far more in the time it frees up for you than it would cost you to pay somebody else to do that. Now, this is something that I can offer some helpful guidance on. My daughter works for a company that provides such services. It's called Online Business Builder, and I'm currently acting as a consultant to that organization to offer their services specifically for caring professionals. That is for people running a caring professions business. So if you were to go to somebody who offers a website, SEO services and so on, they will treat you like any other business. But what I've been doing with this particular company is helping them to target their services to be as helpful as possible to the people who are running a caring professions business. And that's exactly why I've been doing this webinar, as part of trying to help bring together what is on offer in terms of these DFY services and what the specific needs of people running a caring professions business are. So the business is called Online Business Builder, but I've been helping to develop a version of that specifically for caring professions people. So it's called, this version specifically for people running a caring professions business is called Caring Business Builder. Now, what customers of that service get is a fast-loading, professionally designed website. And it's been designed by a marketing expert. So it will be very effective in targeting the right words, for actually phrasing it in such a way that it should generate interest and not making the mistakes that so many existing websites make. Part of it too will be local search engine optimization, helping you to be found in your local area for your services. There's also social media management, which is fully automated. So what it involves is working with you to produce a set of social media posts that will help to publicize your business, and then having the company's software automatically send that around social media on a regular basis. So you can add to that your own posts if you want to from time to time, but it's mainly set up for you. Now, the big question, of course, in your mind is, yeah, but how much would this cost? Well, it's actually been set up to be charged at basically £5 plus VAT per day, or another way of putting that is £150 a month. But as one of the directors of the business put it to me, if you can't earn £5 a day, then you have to question whether you're in business or not, whether you are taking your business seriously. But if that £5 a day frees you up to be able to concentrate on doing the business, doing what you enjoy most, actually practicing your caring professions skills. And you don't have to worry about all this stuff about websites and SEO and social media. Then that frees you up enormously to get on with the job. Now, there are two ways in which we can try and help you with this, or this company can try and help you. One is, as it says on the screen, you can sign up for the free email course at www.caringbusinessbuilder.com. So what that means is if you go to that website, a pop-up will appear after a few seconds. You put your email address into that and you will receive 10 lessons, one every 3 days, talking about different aspects about running a caring professions business. And it's under no obligation. You're not, signing up for anything. You don't need to provide a credit card or anything silly like that. Now, what you can also be arranged is that if you already have a website but it's not working for you, then one of the marketing experts from Caring Business Builder will be prepared to look at your existing website free of charge and produce a 10 to 15 minute video reviewing your website. So they'll go through page by page and say, yeah, this is good, that works really well, but you may have a problem with this. No wonder you're struggling to get referrals or whatever. That's totally free of charge. Now, if that's of interest to you, then if you go to caringbusinessbuilder.com, there's a contact us box there. Just fill that in and say, I'd like a free website review, please, and that will be arranged for you. So that should help you to decide what's the best way forward. Okay, so that's it. That's what I wanted to say. Just to sum up very briefly, the world of work is changing. It's changing in some ways that are helpful, but a lot of ways that add additional pressures, additional insecurities, and so on. More and more people now with a caring professions background are in the position where they need to run their own business. Making the transition from being a caring professions employee to being a self-employed business owner in a competitive environment, that transition is huge and difficult. And it's no wonder a lot of people struggle. And some people, even after years in business, are still struggling to get it right. So what it's about is trying to understand what's involved in making that adjustment to it, to the new world, if you like, of running a caring professions business. What I've tried to put forward is the idea that we need to focus on a business mindset. And a key part of that business mindset is marketing. If you're not actually communicating to people, this is how I or we can benefit you, then they're unlikely to want your services and you will struggle to make a success of your business. So I hope this has been useful to you. And if there's anything further I can do to help, then I'll be pleased to hear from you. Thank you very much.